Suite aux discussions.
Following discussions among representatives of all parties in the House, I understand there's agreement to observe a moment of silence in memory of the victims of the attack on the Quebec City Islamic Cultural Center that happened 4 years ago today. I now invite honorable members to rise.
Merci. Merci. Oral questions. Questions orales. L'honorable député de Chicoutimi.
The honourable member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, today we learned that the EU is going to require that vaccine producers obtain an authorization before exporting the vaccines. That's very bad news for Canada. We are already late on our timeline. Quebec is ready to administer 250,000 doses a week. How many Quebecers will not receive the vaccine because of this decision? The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our government and I have been in contact with my EU counterpart, and as the Prime Minister said in this House, the EU measures will not affect the shipment of vaccines to Canada. We will continue to work with the European Union as we have throughout this pandemic to ensure that critical health and medical supply chains remain open and resilient. We share the urgency of Canadians to ensure access to vaccines as rapidly as possible, and our government is operating with this sense of urgency every single day. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, it's no good to keep repeating that we have bought more doses than anyone else when we can't actually get our hands on them. In order to vaccinate all Canadians by the end of September, we will need 60 million doses. We are now 20th in the rankings, and we keep sinking further in the rankings week over week. The contracts were badly negotiated. People's lives are at stake. What will it take for this government to wake up? The Honourable Minister.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, we will take action with great urgency to secure doses of the vaccine. We want to ensure that Canadians know that we can obtain vaccines. We will have obtained 6 million doses by the end of the first quarter of this year. And by the end of the third quarter, that is the end of September, we will have enough doses from vaccines that have already been approved that all Canadians who want to get a vaccine will be able to. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, 60 million doses, that is 2 doses per Canadian, is what it will take to reach the objective set by the government. That represents 2 million doses a week. We know that we will be receiving 0 doses this week and very few next week. How does the Prime Minister plan to compensate for this unacceptable delay? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we have shared with all the provinces and territories and all Canadians, we have shared the number of doses we are expecting, and we will receive enough doses by the end of the third quarter, even if there are only doses from the 2 vaccines that are already authorized. And we will be able to provide a vaccine to all Canadians who wish to receive it by the end of September.
Mr. Speaker, our oil isn't flowing, our vaccines aren't landing, and now Buy America is set to put thousands of Canadians out of work. President Biden had these policies as a key part of his campaign platform. The Liberals had plenty of time to prepare for this possibility. Will the Prime Minister do something for Canadian workers and immediately act to protect Canadian jobs?
The Honourable Minister.
Monsieur le Président, nous défendrons toujours
Mr. Speaker, we will always defend Canadians' interests. The Prime Minister has spoken with the President and has highlighted that workers need to be able to benefit from our integrated supply chains. The Prime Minister and the President have agreed to consult each other to protect trade between our two countries. We will work together to support a sustainable economic recovery. Thank you.
Member for Portage Lisgar.
Mr. Speaker, there's a pattern here. The Prime Minister just surrendered on Keystone XL. He is surrendering on Line 5, and now he's throwing up his hands and doing nothing to protect Canadian jobs from this Buy America policy. Our previous government worked with the Obama administration to get an exemption from their Buy American policies. To get our economy back on track, Canadians need a government that will secure jobs now and for the future. So will the Liberals push for an exemption, yes or no?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our government will always stand up for Canadian businesses and Canadian workers. The Prime Minister and the President agreed to consult closely to avoid any measures that may constrain bilateral trade and economic growth between our two countries. Canada is the largest export market for the United States, buying more goods from the U.S. than China, UK, and Japan combined. Canada is the #1 customer for more than 32 states. So yes, we will continue to work to stand up for Canadian businesses and the Canadian people so that we can grow middle-class jobs here in Canada.
La députée de Saint-Jean.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, epidemiologists are sounding the alarm. The only way to control the pandemic is to ensure that most Quebecers are vaccinated before the new COVID-19 variants take hold in Quebec. But yesterday, Ontario Public Health revealed that not only has the British variant reached the province, it will become the principal strain of the virus by March. That's a piece of very bad news, especially because we will be getting 70% less of the Pfizer vaccine than initially planned. What is the Prime Minister doing to ensure that we get the vaccines promised? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I will just say that we have been working closely with provinces and territories to make sure they have the supports, the tools, and the necessary resources to deploy the vaccine as it arrives in Canada. And I am extremely grateful to the hardworking ministers of health from all across the country who are doing exactly that. We'll continue to work together to protect the health of Canadians, including Quebecers.
Député de Saint-Jean.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, the bad news just keeps piling up. We have heard that there won't be any Pfizer vaccine doses arriving this week. Then we heard that there would be 50% less after that, and then 70% less. The government keeps saying that it will reach its goal by March, but at this point, it's hard not to have serious doubts. We are 20th in the world in the vaccine rankings, and our position keeps slipping. What is the Prime Minister going to do? The Honourable Minister.
Monsieur le Président, nous avons...
Mr. Speaker, we have communicated very clearly with all the provinces and territories regarding vaccine deliveries. And I would repeat to my honourable colleague that we will receive 6 million doses of the vaccine by the end of the first quarter. And we will continue to receive more and more vaccine doses in Canada and Quebec throughout the year. That way, by the end of September, all Canadians who wish to receive the vaccine will be able to get it. And that's only considering the 2 already approved vaccines.
This way.
First, Pfizer delivery interruptions delayed vaccine doses to Canadians. Then EU export controls threatened our supply. Now reports from think tanks are raising alarms. According to the UK-based Economist Intelligence Unit, the majority of Canadians may have to wait 6 months longer than Americans and Europeans for vaccines and won't be vaccinated until mid-2022. Canada already is falling behind virtually dozens of countries in vaccinations. Why is this Liberal government failing to secure timely vaccines, and can they guarantee that every Canadian will be fully vaccinated by this September?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as we've set out many times and shared with provinces and territories, we have a delivery schedule of the already approved vaccines that get us to a sufficient number whereby every Canadian who wishes to receive a vaccine by the end of September will have access to one. Of course, we've procured other vaccines which are in the middle of regulatory approval or have yet to begun that process, and that would add, of course, to that total. And when we get to all 7 procured vaccines, that is enough to vaccinate Canadians 10 times. So we have a very diversified portfolio, and we're going to continue to work urgently to get those vaccines into Canada and to vaccinate Canadians.
Member for London Fanshawe.
Mr. Speaker, under the Liberals' pay equity regulations, which could have been delayed or which have been delayed again, Canadian women could be forced to wait until 2029 or longer to receive equal pay. This is after already waiting 50 years since the Royal Commission on the Status of Women called for it. Every year that passes is another year where this so-called feminist government participates in wage discrimination. Why are Liberals content with discriminating against women for another decade?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I agree with the honourable member on pay equity. Pay equity isn't just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. That's why we passed proactive pay equity legislation in 2018. When Canadian women can count on equal pay for work of equal value, our economy grows stronger. Karen Jensen has been appointed to serve as Canada's first Employment Pay Equity Commissioner, and she is developing tools and resources for employers to support employers with implementation. Regulations were released for consultation last fall, and once finalized, they will complement the Act and allow it to be brought in force later this year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, with regard to the recently announced EU export restrictions on vaccines, CBC's Janice McGregor has just recently tweeted, "I don't see anything in these regs exempting Canada or any other countries with free trade agreements with the EU from having their shipments monitored and caught up in the fresh red tape of these new authorization requirements." This is pretty bad. It's definitely going to affect Canadians' supply of vaccines. Does the minister care to comment?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for that important question. I have been in contact with my EU counterpart as recent as yesterday, the Prime Minister having spoken to the President, and we are assured that the EU measures will not affect the shipment of vaccines to Canada. We will continue to work with the European Union as we have throughout this pandemic, and we absolutely understand the urgency, and in fact, we are working with that sense of urgency every single day to make sure that Canadians get vaccinated. Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're already experiencing a major shortfall of vaccines. Our math says 2 million doses per week are needed to meet, on average, to meet the target of September. We're nowhere close to that. Mr. Speaker, all of our vaccines that the government has supposedly procured are produced in the EU, or the majority of them. And now the EU is saying that there are going to be export restrictions. There are no exemptions for countries with free trade agreement, and the EU has not said that Canada is exempted. So given that we're seeing such a shortfall, forgive me, I just don't think I can take the government's word for it. What have they secured in terms of assurances that we will get these vaccines and not be part of these new restrictions?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, we continue to work with the European Union. We are absolutely seized with this. We understand how important this is and how urgent this is, which is why I spoke to my EU counterpart yesterday, which is why the Prime Minister spoke to the President. We will continue to work with the European Union on this matter. And as I said earlier, the EU measures will not affect the shipment of vaccines to Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
Mr. Speaker, last election, this government promised to plant 2 billion trees. Well, here we are over a year later, and not only have they failed to plant even one single tree, but the Nonpartisan Parliamentary Budget Office says their announced funding is only half of what's required. Now, I know this government is fond of poorly thought out plans, but this is ridiculous. Will the government be cutting their tree target in half or doubling the money they're planning to spend?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me actually quote the PBO report, and I'm sure my colleague has read. Parameters used for this estimate are based off data from Forests Ontario 50 million tree program. It may not accurately reflect program costs under the federal government's 2 billion tree program. That says it all. We are partnering with the provinces and territories, with Indigenous groups, with NGOs to make sure we get it right. We are committed to combating climate change, and planting 2 billion trees is a part of our ambitious plan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
Mr. Speaker, it's not me saying that their plan is barely half of what is required. It's the nonpartisan Parliamentary Budget Office. Now, not only that, but the report's numbers are based on 1,500 trees a hectare. The government has said they start planting urban trees first, which are far more expensive per tree than even the budget officer's figures. It's simply not credible for the government to make this happen with their recklessly drawn up plan. What is the actual cost going to be to Canadians? Or are they just simply planning to abandon the 2 billion tree promise like they have with so many other commitments?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are committed to planting 2 billion trees, and the first trees will be in the ground this spring. The PBO report only considers the cost of planting trees in Ontario. The PBO also states their estimates may not accurately reflect program costs because of this narrow scope. We're planting several different types of trees across Canada based on what is native to the local environment. Generations of Canadians for decades to come will recognize the importance of this initiative. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Honourable Member for Kildonan, St. Paul.
Notable Hong Kong pro-democracy activist Joshua Wong has been sentenced to a year in prison for participating in peaceful protests. 3 weeks ago, 53 lawmakers and pro-democracy activists were arrested for violating Hong Kong's draconian national security law. The alarming threat from the Chinese Communist Party is escalating rapidly. Meanwhile, we found out in an immigration committee this week that the Liberals' support policies for Hong Kong have been delayed without notice, and they were already lackluster to begin with. Will the minister stand with Hong Kong and finally introduce a real refugee and asylum program to bring pro-democracy activists to Canada?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canada joined the international community in condemning the mass arrests in Hong Kong of more than 50 lawmakers and activists. These arrests fundamentally contradict the civil and political guarantees that have been made to the people of Hong Kong under the Basic Law. This demonstrates that the national security law is being used as a tool in escalating repression of peaceful political opposition and grassroots electoral politics. The arrests and an assault on representative democracy, the rule of law, and a further erosion of the one country, two systems principle. Canada will continue to hold authorities in Beijing and Hong Kong.
The Honourable Member for Kildonan, St. Paul.
Karen de Malata is a live-in caregiver from the Philippines working for 2 doctors on the front lines of the COVID crisis in Ottawa. Sadly, Karen was diagnosed with chronic kidney disease, and as a result, her immigration status has been put in limbo. The Liberals have been sitting on her humanitarian compassionate application for a year. Without approval, she will be forced to return to the Philippines, where she won't have access to proper medical care and will die, leaving her 2 children motherless. Karen is a tax-paying member of Canadian society. She's contributing to the COVID effort. The delay is completely un-Canadian. Will the Minister of Immigration expedite Karen's case?
Minister. La ministre ou secrétaire parlementaire.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We understand that decisions in immigration cases can have a profound impact on people's lives. Each file is evaluated based on the facts and in all respect of the laws of Canada. Each case is evaluated on its own merits. I cannot discuss an individual case due to confidentiality legislation, as my colleague does know, but I will be pleased to work with her on individual cases. The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagot. Mr. Speaker, the Canadian government is completely ignoring the aerospace industry. Since the beginning of the pandemic, at least 40% of workers in the sector have been laid off. It should be obvious that this is a difficult period for the aerospace industry, since airplanes are grounded all around the world. On Monday, Unifor published a plan to get out of this crisis. Workers are demanding a comprehensive aerospace policy. Canada is the only major player in the sector in the world that doesn't have one. When will Ottawa take action for aerospace? The Honourable Minister.
La ministre ou secrétaire par...
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary or Minister.
Monsieur le Président, je suis d'accord avec mon...
Mr. Speaker, I agree with my colleague that the aerospace industry is extremely important in Quebec, not just in Montreal, where I live, but in many other regions as well. It's important for exports, it's important for Quebec's image and Canada's image in the world. It creates good, well-paid jobs at home and contributes to research and development. We will always support the sector. The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Mr. Speaker, Quebec is a global leader, as my colleague just said, in aerospace. And yet Ottawa is ignoring the industry. We need a comprehensive policy to build the future of the sector. We need to ensure that government purchases lead to economic benefits at home, especially when it comes to defense. We also need to ensure that federal aid policies that help companies also help workers and protect their jobs. Mr. Speaker, this is a key industry in Quebec, with 43,000 jobs for Quebecers. When will this government take action to help these people to get through the pandemic? The Honourable Minister.
Allow me to assure my esteemed colleague that we recognize that the aerospace and aviation industries are very significant and that we will always be there for their workers. Through our economic response plan, we have put in place extensive measures to help Canadian businesses weather COVID-19. Our government will always stand with the sector and with the workers that we're so incredibly proud of. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday, a unanimous consent motion was tabled to set up a selection committee for choosing the next Governor General. But the Liberals refused to adopt that motion. Does the Prime Minister think that the vetting process that he used for Julie Payette, does he really think that was better? The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, every Canadian, as I indicated yesterday, deserves to go to work each day in a safe workplace environment, free from harassment. That includes the hardworking and dedicated employees who work at Rideau Hall. We took this matter very seriously from the beginning and put in place an independent review process. Following that process, the Prime Minister accepted Madame Payette's resignation, and we are in the process of reviewing the next steps.
The Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Well, Mr. Speaker, because of the Prime Minister's failure, the Canadian taxpayer is on the hook for $350,000 a year pension and expense account for the former Governor General. How is the Prime Minister going to show Canadians that his continual lack of good judgment won't have to keep being paid for by their hard work?
The Honourable Minister.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, the former Governor General's annuity will be dealt with in accordance with the Governor General's Act, something that has been in place for many years. The reimbursement of expenditures to the former Governor General is the responsibility of the Office of the Secretary to the Governor General. The new leadership at Rideau Hall will be able to address the serious concerns that are raised in good part if
The Honourable Member for Regina-Luban.
Mr. Speaker, employees at the Regina Airport are beyond worried. They've been told outright that their jobs are being eliminated and the control tower will be shut down. The control tower is an integral part of the safety of air traffic in Saskatchewan. And it's important because of our proximity to 15-wing Air Base in Moose Jaw. Now, the people of Saskatchewan can tell when they're being hosed. So when the minister, please explain his contradiction from yesterday when he said the report was not finished, but layoff notices still went out.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, safety and security of the traveling public is our top priority. NAV Canada is undertaking several studies to assess the level of service needs. No decisions have been made. It is important to note that any changes in the level of services proposed by NAV Canada will be subject to a rigorous safety assessment. The process provides for full consultation with all effective stakeholders. No compromise on safety will be tolerated. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Regina Leuven.
Mr. Speaker, I know what the minister's trying to do. You see, I come from a farm in Saskatchewan, and we pride ourselves in having common sense and knowing when the wool is going to be pulled over our eyes. Actually, the people of Saskatchewan have a new phrase for this. It's called getting liberaled. The minister yesterday said that there was no final decision that was made. And now I have layoff notices from these employees. So either he's contradicting NAV Canada or he should ask NAV Canada to rescind these layoff notices. So what is it? Is the fix in? Is this decision already been made?
The Honourable Parliament Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we understand the hard impact of NAV Canada's decision and how they've impacted Canadians and employees of NAV Canada across the country. But again, it is important to note that any changes in the level of service proposed by NAV Canada is subject to a rigorous safety assessment by Transport Canada officials. No compromise on safety will ever be tolerated at Transport Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, on Tuesday, President Biden held a climate day, signing a series of executive orders to take ambitious action on the climate crisis, with a focus on jobs, equity, and scientific integrity. His sweeping new orders included freezing new oil and gas leases on public lands, cutting fossil fuel subsidies, and establishing a civilian climate corps to put people to work conserving and restoring the environment. In contrast, our Prime Minister looks more like a climate laggard, announcing unambitious, empty promises won't cut it. When will the Liberals take action that meets the scale of the crisis?
Minister or Parliament Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Climate change threatens our health, our way of life, and planet, and that's why our government is taking significant action to address this crisis. My honourable colleague knows that full well. We're delivering on our promise to Canadians to bring forward a strengthened climate plan that includes creating thousands of jobs across the country, ensuring that we not only meet but exceed our Paris targets, and lay the foundation for net zero emissions by 2050. We'll continue to work with all Canadians on climate action and to ensure a more sustainable future for our children and grandchildren. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Parliamentary Budget Officer revealed the Liberals are underfunding their promise of planting 2 billion extra trees by nearly 50%. The PBO found that an additional 2.7 billion will be required, bringing the overall cost closer to 5.9 billion. By underfunding this initiative, the Liberals show that they're not serious about fighting climate change. Will this government put its money where its mouth is, or was this just talk all along?
The Honourable Minister or Parliament Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, as I said before, we are committed to planting 2 billion trees. And let me quote from the PBO report, and I encourage my colleague to actually read it, wherein I quote, "Parameters used for this estimate are based off data from Forests Ontario 50 million tree program and may not accurately reflect program costs under the federal government's 2 billion tree program." Mr. Speaker, we are partnering with the provinces and territories, with Indigenous groups, NGOs, to make sure we get this right. We are committed to combating climate change, and planting 2 billion trees is a part of our ambitious plan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Surrey Centre.
Mr. Speaker, businesses across the country have been hit hard by the pandemic, many seeing dramatic losses in profit. Small businesses in Surrey Centre are wondering how their eligibility for the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy, Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, and Canada Emergency Business Account will be impacted in 2021, as some of them experienced decreased profits in 2020. Can the minister update the House on how our government will address eligibility for these essential supports as we continue to manage the negative impacts of the pandemic on businesses across Canada?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my colleague from Surrey Centre for his continued advocacy for small businesses in his riding and across Canada. Our government knows that businesses are still struggling very much under the second wave of COVID-19, and this is why we've made our program application deadlines carry through until 2021. The Emergency Business Account, which has provided support to more than 800,000 small and medium-sized businesses, is now open until March 31st of this year. The new rental subsidy program, which has now connected 94,000 businesses to support, is available until June of this year, and the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, which has helped keep more than 4.5 million workers on the payroll, will be available till June of 2021. Our government's going to continue to be there to support Canadians and Canadian businesses as we have been since this pandemic.
The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's great to hear from the Parliamentary Secretary, but I've heard from numerous startups who started up in 2020 and they're continuing to be denied these business supports for COVID-19. Mark is a constituent of Elgin, Middlesex, London, opened a new business called the Icebox. Mark has contacted my office regarding the federal government, who did not revise criteria for these small businesses, despite the province of Ontario making these necessary changes. Will the finance minister commit to revising the eligibility of COVID-19 supports for businesses and stop disqualifying businesses who are trying to survive under these public restrictions?
Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the honourable colleague for that important question and her advocacy, her continued advocacy for small businesses. And from the very beginning of this pandemic, we have been listening to and working with businesses to make sure that there are broad range of supports. I was very pleased just earlier this week to announce an additional support, a lifeline support for businesses, the highly affected business program, otherwise called HASCAP. It's another way to help our businesses with loans starting from $25,000 all the way to $1 million, and for those businesses under one entity that have multiple locations, up to $6.25 million. This is another way.
Out of time, and we'll go to the honourable member for Bow River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After a year of lockdowns, my constituents don't have access to rapid tests in this riding. Vaccine, who knows? Now Europe is restricting exports of vaccines, so those aren't available either. My constituencies are reading stories of rapid testing and vaccines having been developed in Calgary and Montreal, and they're angry. When can my constituents expect rapid tests and vaccine availability in the riding? They want to return to work and normal life, but when?
Honourable Minister or Parliament Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And in fact, as the member opposite may or may not know, in fact, the delivery of healthcare falls within the jurisdiction of the provinces and territories. But having said that, we've been supporting provinces and territories to have the tools they need. Almost 16.8 million rapid tests have been sent to provinces and territories to date. Almost 6 million to Ontario, 3 million to Quebec, 1.5 million to Alberta, 1.5 million to BC. And Mr. Speaker, furthermore, new guidance released from the Testing and Screening Strategy Expert Panel to help provinces deploy those rapid tests. I suggest he speak to his MLA.
Well, member for Calgary, Forest Lawn.
Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister continues to remain silent on Enbridge's Line 5. The other day, he told the Leader of the Official Opposition that he has always stood up for Canadian interests. But I'm puzzled. He refuses to say Line 5 by name, and his minister is waiting to talk to the new Energy Secretary as soon as she's sworn in, whenever that is. Thousands of jobs are dependent on this pipeline on both sides of the border, and it's so crucial that we get this right. No urgency is being shown. The clock is ticking. What is this government proactively doing, if anything, to save Line 5, or do they want to see this one ripped out of the ground too?
The Honourable Minister or Parliament Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, let me be very clear. Our government supports the operation of Enbridge's Line 5. It's been in there since the 1950s, and it is vital to the economy of Canada. It supplies Imperial, Shell, and Suncor's refineries in Sarnia, Ontario. It supplies Suncor's refinery in Montreal and Valero's refinery in Lévis, Quebec. It delivers 66% of the crude oil consumed in Quebec. This is a vital pipeline. We believe in it. We support it. We are continuing to work alongside our Ambassador Hillman and Consul General Martin. We will continue to advocate for Line 5.
Member for Battle River, Crowfoot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this week, disgraced former Finance Minister Bill Morneau announced that his bid for Secretary General of the OECD was over. This happened while the saga continues with the Student Jobs We scandal cover-up. Liberals scheming with Liberals to ensure insiders get ahead while Canadians suffer. They will claim that it's simply time to move on, but in reality, their lack of transparency proves that they have something to hide. Enough is enough. Will the Liberals reveal the cost of this endorsement boondoggle and commit to coming clean on We scandal?
The Honourable Minister or Parliament Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, yes, Bill Morneau announced earlier this week that he had withdrawn from his candidacy with respect to the OECD Secretary General position. We would like to thank Bill Morneau for throwing his hat into the ring. We feel that he would have been an excellent representative due to his public and private experience. Having said that, we will, of course, continue to support whoever is in the position of this very important organization, the OECD.
The Honourable Member for Manicouagan. Mr. Speaker, you know it comes as no surprise that the report in the Governor-General is available only in English because only English Canada cares about the monarchy. What matters to Quebec is how the money we send to Ottawa gets spent. Millions of dollars for the monarchy is not a good way to spend our tax dollars, nor is a lifetime pension for a tyrannical Governor-General. No. Until ties are cut to this symbol of real submission, can the Prime Minister commit to not giving a lifetime pension to former Governor-General Judy Payette? The Honourable Minister of Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this symbol is, in fact, a very important symbol. It's a part of our Canadian heritage. And the former Governor-General, as I indicated earlier, Governor-General's annuity will be dealt with in accordance with the Governor-General's Act. The reimbursement of expenditures to the former Governor-General is the responsibility of the Office of the Secretary to the Governor-General. The new leadership at Rideau Hall will be able to address the serious concerns that are being raised.
The Honourable Member for Manicouagan. Mr. Speaker, as if a lifetime pension weren't enough, the former Governor-General will also be entitled to a generous expense account that should allow her to continue to lead a royal lifestyle, complete with champagne and caviar. Former Governor-General Adrienne Clarkson, for example, claimed up to $100,000 per year after her term ended. Being appointed a Governor-General is like winning the Set for Life lottery. And even when they resign for harassment, intimidation, or verbal violence. Will the Prime Minister cut the purse strings to the former Governor-General who resigned? The Honourable Minister of Parliamentary Secretary.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, as I had indicated, the new leadership at Rideau Hall will be able to address the many serious concerns that have, in fact, been raised. It's important to keep in mind that the reimbursements of expenditures to former Governor-General is the responsibility of the Office of the Secretary to the Governor-General, where many things are taken into consideration.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse, Des-Iches-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, we have learned that the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation is refusing to finance seniors' homes with less than 50 units. In small communities, it's unfair. The care homes in Lévis, Bellechasse, et Chemin and throughout Quebec are affected by this unjust policy. This is important for our seniors, particularly during a pandemic. Will the minister reverse immediately this unfair policy and put an end to this systemic discrimination against our seniors living in regions? The Honourable Minister, Parliamentary Secretary.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, helping seniors access affordable housing and staying at home in their communities is one of the great priorities of this government. The National Housing Strategy will help meet the needs for housing through funding.
We can do through the National Housing Strategy. Our government is looking to fill gaps to gain more information on the housing needs of Canada's most vulnerable populations, including seniors, and to better respond in the future.
Member for Steveston, Richmond East.
Mr. Speaker, food is a significant part of many ethnic communities. Like them, for many Canadians, food insecurity creates barriers to participation in social activities. With the pandemic and economic downturn, many have to rely on food banks or charities for support. This lowers the connection they feel to their culture and harms a sense of well-being. Why isn't the government taking any action to address food insecurity for marginalized Canadians?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, food security is critically important to Canadians and to their health, and that's why we were in the very beginning of the pandemic so invested in ensuring that many of the food providers around the country had the support they need. We invested millions and millions of dollars across the country, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that food security could continue to be the front and center for communities. And in fact, in my own community of Thunder Bay Superior North, I want to thank the Roots to Harvest group who have done such an exemplary job filling the gaps for so many Canadians in need.
The Honourable Member for Montmagny, Lila, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, in the past 2 weeks, a number of cases of CERB fraud have been identified. Others have seen their EI files blocked, both for Canada Revenue Agency and Service Canada. The wait times on the phone are terrible and unacceptable. It's as if we were back at the beginning of the pandemic. After months in which they had time to prepare, why has the government not ensured there are enough people to handle the phone lines to deal with people's calls? The Honourable Minister.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, yes, we recognize that there are delays. People who call have seen an increase in the wait times. Given the CERB programs being provided, I want to thank the people in the service centers who have worked the phone lines to help throughout this pandemic. We have announced additional funding for these service and call centers, and we are working to find additional solutions in order to better serve clients during the tax season. News that we will announce shortly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Moncton Riverview Dieppe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. More now than ever during the COVID-19 pandemic, our homes have become a refuge, a place of sanctuary and security. That's why the Government of Canada ensures that all Canadians have access to an affordable home. My constituents believe firmly that all Canadians should have access to affordable housing. This is an important goal that we must all work towards. The Minister for Families, Children and Social Development, could the Minister tell us what the government is doing to create affordable housing? Thank you. The Minister.
It is very important that in our response to the COVID-19 pandemic, we keep in mind the most vulnerable members of our society, in addition to the regular National Housing Strategy programs, such as the National Housing Co-Investment Fund that is dedicated to creating deeply affordable housing units. We have introduced the Rapid Housing Initiative, a $1 billion program that will build at least 3,000 affordable housing units right across the country, and focusing on the most vulnerable Canadians, including those who are homeless or at risk of homelessness, in addition to women and children fleeing domestic violence, as well as vulnerable seniors.
Member for Saskatoon, Grasswood.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, Saskatoon Grasswood is home to thousands of seniors living in retirement residence and care homes, communities, as we all know, that have a greatly increased risk due to COVID. Now, my office receives calls every day from senior residents and care homes and other institutions wondering when the vaccines that this government insists are abundant, when will they arrive? In fact, when will the government give Canadians from Saskatoon Grasswood an honest timeline when they can expect to be vaccinated?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, every single step of the way, we've been working with provinces and territories to protect people living in long-term care homes, including by ensuring that we provided national guidance that could support provincial guidance on vaccination priorities. But let me back up, Mr. Speaker. With the Safe Restart money that we provided to provinces and territories in the spring, $740 million earmarked to protect people living in seniors' residences, an additional $1 billion committed through the fall economic statement, Mr. Speaker, towards a development of standards, and yes, prioritization for vaccination. We'll be working with provinces and territories to make sure that we do all we can to help them deliver on their healthcare responsibility of providing care for older people in their jurisdiction.
The honourable member for Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke.
Mr. Speaker, while cracking down on civilian travel, the government continues to deploy our military overseas to COVID-stricken locations without vaccinating them first. It was revealed this week that incidents of COVID-19 have been on the rise with the members of the Canadian Armed Forces. In fact, Canadian troops in Latvia have contracted COVID. Why are Canada's brave women and men in the armed forces getting chaos from this government when what they need are vaccines?
Honourable Minister or Parliament Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, the health and well-being of our Canadian Armed Forces members is always a top priority. Since the beginning of this pandemic, our Surgeon General and the Chief of Defence Staff had taken measures to making sure that our members are safe. Our Surgeon General currently is monitoring very closely the vaccine rollout for our Canadian members, and I can assure the member and all Canadians that our Canadian Armed Forces members will be prioritized according to the best science and medical advice from our Surgeon General. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, so many billions spent, so few actual vaccines. The European Union is considering limiting vaccine exports. We don't have an agreement with the U.S., and Canada has no capacity to make vaccines here. This government has put Canada in a poor position when it comes to vaccine supply. No one in Canada believes that we will all be vaccinated by September. In order to learn from the errors of this Liberal government and not repeat those mistakes, could there be transparency, and could Canadians see the vaccine supply contracts like the European Union is doing with AstraZeneca? Mr. Speaker, we are communicating with our partners in the provinces and the territories when it comes to vaccines that they can expect to receive. We have reached agreements for already approved vaccines to ensure that all will go well and that we will have some by the end of the third quarter. We continue to be open and show transparency and equip our partners to ensure that this very great effort of vaccination campaign will be begun as we have expected.
Agincourt.
Mr. Speaker, since day one, Canadian frontline workers have been unwavering in their support for vulnerable Canadians in the face of this pandemic. Like the staff at Shepherd Village and Mongchong, in my riding of Scarborough-Agincourt, essential workers are rising to the challenge each day to keep our seniors safe and healthy. The recent outbreak at TenderCare is tragic, and across the country, long-term care homes have been disproportionately affected. And so today, I asked the Minister of Health, what is our government doing to help support long-term care residents in Canada and those who care for them?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'd just like to thank the member from Scarborough-Agincourt for her dedicated focus on the wellness of seniors, not only in her riding, but Canada-wide. I will just say this, Mr. Speaker, every step of the way, we've been there to help support provinces and territories deliver on their healthcare responsibilities for people in long-term care, whether it was the $740 million in the spring through the Safe Restart Agreement to improve infection prevention control measures, whether it's the $1 billion in the fall economic statement to upgrade standards and ensure that there are standards across the country, and indeed by sending in the Red Cross and the Canadian Armed Forces in cases of extreme crisis. So, Mr. Speaker, just to say that this government is solely...
The honourable member for Nunavut.
Baffin-Lan, a mining company in my riding, is planning expansion at Mary River. This week, consultations continued concerning the fact that they want to build a railway in primary breeding grounds for narwhals. The local Hunters and Trappers Association, along with groups closest, are clearly opposed to this rapid expansion, which provides uncertainty for food supply and future of Inuit. Why is this project being allowed to go ahead when there is clear opposition from Inuit in the communities? When will the federal government stop valuing natural resource extraction over Inuit and wildlife survival?
Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm happy to respond to the question. As the member knows, everything that we do across the North, we do in conjunction with Indigenous people. We do with consultation and from listening to Northerners. Right now, what's happening is that this resource development process is going through public hearings. There will be a final step in this review process that will be designed to ensure the project is environmentally and socially responsible while considering the concerns of Nunavut. She also knows that upon conclusion of the assessment, there is a period of time in which both the board and the government will respond, and that will also include the duty to consult with all those that are impacted.
The honourable member for Fredericton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. January 28th is observed as Let's Talk Day, sponsored by a well-known corporation. While it was heartwarming to see the solidarity to end the stigma, we are still waiting for this government to set national standards for access to mental health services so Canadians can get the support they need when they need it beyond their screens. Mental health service providers on the ground in our communities need our full support every day of the year. Systemic and concert actions are needed immediately, including the direct funding for mental health service providers and the removal of the tax on counseling services. Mr. Speaker, will this government commit to doing this today?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I can tell the member opposite that, in fact, mental health has remained a priority for this government since the beginning, since 2015. And in fact, national standard work is underway with provinces and territories, as she well knows. I will also say that through the pandemic, the federal government is fully funding wellnesstogether.ca, a really important tool to help Canadians get access to free, confidential care no matter where they live in both official languages with translation into 60 others. I encourage every Canadian to check out wellnesstogether.ca today so that they can see for themselves the resources that are available to help them and their family members and loved ones.
This will conclude question period for today.